What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Everlasting Veteran. I am your host, Ryan Landry, aka Wind Talker. Today, I have Doug Fleming, aka D Paul Fleming, a author, 100% disabled military veteran, served with the U.S. Navy, and he's here to talk about his books and his journey and his story. I'd like to turn it over to Paul and talk to you guys about what it was like being in the military, working with Vet Force, being a board member with Vet Force, and how he came about writing his books. Paul?
Well, hello there, Ryan.
Hello.
Everlasting, Mr. Everlasting. Is that how I should call you? Mr. Everlasting?
Yeah, whatever you want. Mr. Everlasting, Everlasting Veteran, Wind Talker, Ryan, whatever you want to call me. Many names, many stuff going on.
Okay, Wind Talker. We'll go with that. We'll go with Wind Talker. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I've enjoyed your podcast, especially the first one. I thought that was spot on for anybody that's either getting ready to transition from the military, who's considering transitioning, or who has already transitioned, left the military. Your first podcast out the gate gives some great insights into what's going on and how to start handling it.
Yeah, it's one thing that I've found that, especially me personally, is the transition out of the military becomes very difficult when everything feels like it's falling apart. You don't have the brotherhood, you don't have the constant support 24/7. And a lot of times, veterans are getting out and, they have to readjust. They don't even have a place to live. Maybe they decide to transition out in the state that they get out of the military in, and their family is not local. So there's many different adversities that veterans face, and that's where the podcast kind of started, to get people focused in the direction of transition and helping with that transition. And I feel like it's talked about a little bit, but I don't feel like there's programs in place that really help with that transition.
Well, I think with a focal point for your podcast, I think it's off to a great start.
Yeah. So let me understand. So how many years did you serve in the Navy?
So I did 4 active, 2 inactive. They threatened to not send me my DD 214 if I didn't show up to some inactive reserve things, but I was so deep inside the VA, I kind of couldn't care less. But I did 4 active and 2 inactive.
Yep. So when you were joining, when you decided to join, all right, what was it? Everything that you thought it was going to be? Signing up, going into the military. What was your MOS in the military?
So, well, I was in interior communications. That was my MOS. Spent the last 2 months of my 4-year active, I'd actually in that field. The rest of it was one heck of a story. I did a lot of different things, but my expectations pre go to boot camp and what I experienced in boot camp was night and day. I thought it was going to be tough and grueling and so on, but honestly, my ride through boot camp was pretty boring.
Yeah,
they appointed me, and I think number 3 in the company. I was in charge of the barracks. I spent most days patrolling the empty barracks by myself. But for me, it was getting yelled at was a piece of cake. And if you read my book, 2,442 Steps to Crazy, you'll understand why.
And that's something you can go check out. It's blackhooks.com, correct?
Blackhawkbooks.com. A signed copy of the book. Reach out to us. Also, you can get it on Amazon.com. But Black follow.
Awesome. And everybody know the banner down below, blackhawkbooks.com. That's where you can go check out the author, D Paul Fleming, and his new book, 2,442 Steps of Crazy. And you have a couple more in the shoot.
I do. The first book is intended to be a series. The next book out is called The Mysteries at the Wyndham Inn. And this one here is a spooky tale, but it also dovetails into some things I'm trying to kind of get across to help anybody who's suffering from trauma. And that storyline is to talk about your past, to talk about trauma. And that's why I wrote the book, 2,442 Steps to Crazy, the beginning, is to tell my story in a hope that others will come forward and do the same. Because in my opinion, my belief, once you start telling the story, you can start the healing process.
That is so true. And I talk about it in some episodes, and some other veterans I talked to. One thing that stuck with me was you have to want to effectively transfer out of the military. And I think, with my podcast, as far as transfer, transition, you have to want to be able to start taking those steps to personally grow, and essentially change your path. We all can learn from failure, but when we feel like we're misguided, we have hopeless days, because we don't have the brotherhood and everything else. One thing for me was I didn't effectively transfer out of the military when I maybe should have, right? You hold on to what you once had because that's what you were used to. Those were the bonds that you had, and they no longer exist in the same way, right? So when you effectively transfer, you find those bonds in a different avenue. Us talking, connecting with other veterans, and you start rebuilding those bonds and those connections in a different way, versus having it there 24/7, which is frankly kind of forced because everybody's under a contract and they have to be there, right? Where you don't have to be here right now, but we're creating that bond and we're continuing the mission that's in place to help other veterans, start that conversation. And it starts with finding out what steps you took to get to where you're at now and the steps I took to get to where I'm at right now. And if we don't, like you said, share our stories, then I don't think anybody's going to be able to understand us, and then they, if they understand us and what we've been through, it may be able to help them through whatever adversities they're facing when they're getting out. Right. Now, Vet Force, right? You're a board member with Vet Force. Explain to me and the listeners kind of what went into Vet Force, what was Vet Force about, and what was your role with Vet Force?
So Vet Force was the largest veterans entrepreneur task force in the country. It was representing over 300 service organizations with its focus, its mission statement to support veteran and disabled veteran-owned business. It was started by a group of incredibly well-respected veterans, led by the chairman of the board, Rick Weidman, who was number 2 inside Vietnam Veterans of America for many decades. If I remember right, he was a medic in Vietnam. And the other members that ran Vet Force, Joe Wynn, still extremely active down in D.C. My uncle, Paul Ignash, Navy SEAL, 2 tours Vietnam. Master Chief Hesser, who became my adopted godfather, he was a critical key member of Vet Force. He used to testify in front of a number of congressional hearings. And then, of course, Victor Klingelhofer, a 101st Airborne Army officer who went on to be a lawyer. That team right there, along with others, I don't want to make sure I don't leave anybody out, but that group right there was the commanding officer staff, if you will. And then there was a number of board members that got elected to help oversee the path and the direction of Vet Force. The most prominent thing that Vet Force done, the one that everybody knows if you're in veteran business, it's Public Law 109-461, commonly coined the Vet First Contracting Act. And what that requires is the Veterans Administration to hire veteran and disabled veteran-owned businesses first. Tether that to Executive Order 13360, which requires all government agencies to spend 3% of their budgets hiring veteran-owned and disabled-owned business. So if you want to learn more about doing business with the government under the Veteran-Owned or Service-Disabled Veteran-Owned Act, reach out to me and I'm happy to give you more detail. But that's the heart of what Vet Force mission statement was.
Gotcha. And I'll make sure that I have his information, Doug Paul Fleming's information up on my website. If you guys need to reach out, I'll have the links for his socials and everything on everlastingveteran.com. Now let's get back to the book a little bit, because I want people to kind of understand where you're coming from, what brought you to the creation of the book, what kind of adversities did you face, or stuff throughout your life that you want readers to connect with and help them through whatever they're going through?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah,
I'm going to try to keep it simple. If I start getting a little long-winded, throw your hat in.
I loaded that up on purpose.
So first and foremost, the mission is to tell my story so that our fellow vets, along with everybody else that has suffered trauma or abuse or child abuse, and again, male, female, anybody that's gone through something in life that was traumatic and has caused you to view yourself differently. I never wanted to tell this story. In fact, the heart of what's in the story, my wife didn't know about until I handed her the book. And I like to say we've been married 50 years. It's a little bit less than that, but you get the the story, 2,442 Steps to Crazy, is roughly a 4 or 5 part series that starts out as childhood trauma, childhood abuse. Well, some folks have asked me, why did I start so far back when I'm trying to, help veterans? They say, well, a lot of veterans go into the military that come from environments where they're less than perfect, so to speak. So abuse in any form is abuse. And I chose a story from my perspective. I was roughly a 5-year-old and walking through a very raw story of what happens in an abusive environment. It's a deeply personal story, but it's also a very moving story. It's a deep story about resiliency and perseverance. And anybody that's gone through even boot camp in the military gets a keen sense of resiliency and perseverance. Mm-hmm. And if you've done 2 years or 4 years or 20 years in the military, you have gone through some forms of trauma, some forms.
Right.
And learning to take steps to talk about your trauma is the origin or the basis of writing these books.
Right. And I love the aspect of it, because there's a lot of people that don't even think about what your life was like before the military, and then add on what happens with the military deployments and everything else. We can coin it simple as, people talk about emptying your glass, when it's becoming full. But what happens when you go into the military and it's already full? And then you go through, trauma and everything with deployments and whatnot. And then you haven't even addressed things prior to the service. Now you have the stuff, prior to the service connected stuff, and then you get out. And you're dealing with all that at the same time, and, I think it's very important. You made the point, we talked about this before, of telling your story, and you may not have to just publicly do it, like in this setting or anything, but talk talking to somebody to be able to better yourself, be the best version of yourself for you. And I talk about that on my podcast a lot, because you can't be the best version of yourself for somebody else if you aren't for yourself first, right? And I would like everybody to take note. I'm going to put the banner up again. You can go check out D Paul Fleming's book at blackhookbooks.com. And I'll also have this on my website, like I said, everlastingveteran.com. So, Doug, tell me what inspired you to start traveling, talking to other veterans as well. What was the main inspiration or multiple inspirations in your life, being a veteran, working with I did my research too, being a police officer. You've worked with contracts and stuff like that with the government, dealing with that kind of stuff, being in vet force. What inspired you to start helping other veterans?
Yeah, again, another great question there, Mr. Windtalker. What inspired me? I guess I would change it a little bit and say all of my life's experiences came to a point where I started to question why I was doing anything. Why is it that contracts with the government became so difficult? Why is it that it's so difficult to work with the VA? Why is it so difficult to find anybody that's willing to talk about their experiences? And for me, it became kind of a mission to help others understand what happens when you go through these traumas. Because again, there's a lot of trauma in life. And for me, learning to be a federal contracting, a person in federal construction, that was pretty traumatic. And there will be a book on, the corruption inside federal contracting. But at the same time, what a lot of people don't know was that Master Chief Hesser set me on a mission to expose corruption within the federal government. So while I was both exposing corruption, fraud, abuse, I was working to be a federal contractor and hire veterans and follow the Vet First program, the Vet First law. So there's a lot of parts and pieces that have kind of unfolded to get me to this point right now. But let's take that and say full stop. It got to a point where I just couldn't deal with it anymore. I had to make a decision. And my decision was to find peace. So I shut everything down, said enough, and I spent a number of years finding peace. Now, that process is a whole podcast all by itself.
Right.
But in the end, when I came to terms with myself, when I came to terms with my PTSD and trauma, and thought I was done, it's like, okay, I win, I'm good. Now I get to walk around and smell the roses and live in peace. And then I got a little whisper in my ear and says, you're not quite done yet.
Yeah, right.
Got something to do.
Yep.
So for me, it was more of a deeply religious calling. And that's what brought me to the point of writing the book. And I got to be honest with you, Ryan, and your viewers, I wanted nothing to do with writing the book or telling my story. Nothing. But the whispers to help others is what was the final straw, so to speak, that got me. And just a quick story on that final day. Mm-hmm. Terry and I were taking a walk and we bumped into somebody that we grew up with. And he starts talking about my childhood. And he was starting to say things that, how the heck did he know these things? And when we walked away, I said, Terry, did somebody just give me a message from the spirit world saying, you need to write your book? What he was saying caught me so off guard that it was a sign. It was a message to me that it's time to write the book. I sat down and literally wrote the book in a couple of months and then went through the self-publishing process. and got it out there. But in the end, I was terrified.
Mm-hmm.
I was having bouts of anxiety, which I thought I'd conquered.
Yep.
But then once the story got out there and then the responses started filtering in and the community kind of rallying around, I started feeling the next step in healing.
Right. Yeah, and I think you bring up a very good point that, you know, even though we can sit here and be like, you know, tell your story, it's not that easy sometimes,
It's
right?
brutal. It's brutal at times.
You know, and I talk to a lot of people, and even doing episodes for this podcast. You know, I've been out of active duty for 11 years now, right? And I got I got back from Afghanistan in 2011, right? Um, you know, been a police officer for the last decade, the last 10 years of my life. And, you know, it wasn't easy for me, you know, to even start mentioning, you know, how I was feeling to my wife, you know, what was going through my head. Because there's a lot of stigmas out there of, you know, you're lesser of a person by doing so. You're not as strong, you know, PTSD, you know, has shaped and formed into, you know, a better view now. But a lot of times, in the past, and it still goes on now, I think, you know, there's jobs, there's people that, you know, place judgment or place labels. And we have to get to the point of, um, not having those anymore. And I think getting to that point of not having labels created and judgment and everything else is going to help more people that just completely shut down, and aren't able to be the best version of themselves, tell their story to help themselves heal, you know. And like you said, talking about it, the anxiety came back. Um, you know, that I can relate to that as far as, you know, different aspects of deployment, you know, and you start talking about your story again, or, you know, there's a certain smell, you know, different triggers throughout your daily activities. There's even times going back to when I got in a car accident when I was 16 years old. Um, you know, I'll be driving the car and all of a sudden, like I feel like I smell the airbag, right? Um, you know, even small little things like that. You know, there's moments in your life coming back from deployment or uh, dealing with trauma, that it may arise when you least expect it. And learning how to properly vent, I guess. Um,
Release.
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 Yeah.
That's a key word that
Yeah.
I'm learning to.
Learn how to release those emotions, be able to be vulnerable, right? Being vulnerable is uncomfortable, because we almost in a sense don't feel like we have the control, right? We want to have the control over our emotions, over everything aspect wise in our life, and learning how to be uncomfortable to be able to grow, I think is a big thing. And
And surrender that control.
surrender, yeah. And you know, for me, my wife was a huge support, um, coming back from Afghanistan, and even when I was stationed over in Germany, she would come over and we'd see each other twice a year. Um, you know, but even being back and going through different um, situations, vulnerable emotions, and being able to just completely open up, was almost like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't holding back anymore. And it put me in a vulnerable sense of, now you know everything. Now you know what I'm thinking. Now you know this. And I'll go to restaurants. Even the other night, we went out for our 18-year-old's birthday, and it's common practice to like, hey, where are you sitting? You know, my back's to the wall. I'm looking at the door. You know, I still do that stuff. You know, it's what's comfortable for me. And I recognize that, and then it's probably not going to change. You don't have to change everything, but there's certain aspects that you have to be aware of when you get into that those dark mindset aspects of talking, and opening up to people that are close to you, so you don't go down that rabbit hole of darkness. Be able to
That's a good analogy.
be able to reach up, and know that the hand's going to be there to help you out of it, you know um and just like I said, being more aware of um
What you're going through.
slipping back into, there's always going to be those rough days, right? Nobody's going to end up having
Yes.
perfect days, but recognizing before you slip into the darkness like you used to,
The triggers.
the triggers, and shutting down. I think it's very important to growth, and a
And
lot,
healing.
and healing, and the release we talk about.
Yes.
So, again, you guys can go check out his book, 2,442 Steps of Crazy. It is on
BlackhawkBooks.com.
blackhawkbooks.com. He goes by D Paul Fleming. There's the banner down below. Now, Doug, explain to me what was the best parts of serving in the military for you?
I got to tell you, um, the safety, the the security of the men around you, the camaraderie, the fact that you didn't worry about your back. Um, there was an energy that that floated around you, that stuck to you, that you were immersed in. That it's like if you've ever played a sport and you've had those super games, championship games, something that gets the adrenaline flowing, but it's at a level that is so high that it grasps your warrior mentality and locks you into it.
Right. Yeah. And what do you think would be the best advice for listeners when they transition, um, and feel like they've lost that? What do you think would be the best advice as far as regaining some of that when you get out of the military?
So the first thing I would say is to recognize the highs of being with your fellow warriors. And again, you don't have to be in combat to have this feeling. There's so
Right.
many veterans who, and again, not just veterans, anybody who are in these environments where they love what they're doing, they're around the greatest people ever, and then something happens, they transition from it, and it creates trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So when you transition from the military, whether you know it or not, you're going through something that is traumatic. And if you don't have something a far side of that, meaning family support, a job, a career, to quickly transition into, then that withdrawal from the military will suck you into, well, guess what? Drinking, drugs, or
Right.
other things that are destructive to your life while you're searching for something to replace that rush, that feeling of security and power that you found around your fellow warriors.
Yeah. And I've done some research myself, because obviously, you know, being a veteran myself and wanting to grow and be there for other veterans, you have to do research yourself for yourself and for other veterans. And one thing is that, and also talking to veterans as well, is the transition stress. All right, it really has nothing to do with the high adrenaline filled stuff of deployments. Right, the transition stress itself is the finding of the job, rebuilding of the brotherhood, all those small aspects that may not necessarily have adrenaline filled highs, but you have to realize and start separating, um, transition stress from what actually is going on with you mentally and physically. And I've learned over the years too that if you don't have your mind right, sometimes your brain, myself having back injuries and everything, your brain may tell you that your injuries that you've sustained are worse and there's nothing you can do about it, because you start slipping into this depression, hopelessness. What would you say to veterans as far as the standpoint of getting out if you have injuries, if you have stresses, mental health stuff? What steps should be taken immediately?
So the first thing I would say is to get it in your record before you leave the military. And what do I mean by that? Before you get discharged, go to your I don't know how you do in the Army, but we'd have a sick call, and go there and say, listen, this is how I'm feeling, and I want to talk to somebody about it. And that's if you're talking about mental wellness. On the physical side, I don't care if your finger hurts, if your ankle hurts. Tell somebody before you leave active duty or before you leave the National Guard or reserves.
Yep.
And then make sure you have a copy of that report from your service jacket. It's a huge piece, because reporting it is a critical step in opening a file within VA. Because if you go to the VA and they look at your record and they say, well, we don't see you ever said anything that you had concerns about mental wellness, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, they're going to shut the door. I've had some tremendous battles trying to get veterans to get inside the VA machine on the mental health side without an existing disability or record of it.
Right. Yeah, and I find that's the biggest struggle too. Is we talk about actually talking about being vulnerable. If you're not willing to be vulnerable and say, hey, I have some stuff going on, down the road when it gets worse, it's going to be harder to prove service connection.
Yeah, and again, that's a key word you just said, harder to prove. Some years ago, the law changed where the veteran is no longer required to prove what he's saying or she's saying.
Right.
The VA just can't say no because we can't find it in your record. The VA has to take you at face value and give the weight of credibility to the veteran's testimony. Now, this is a big piece in chasing the VA, so to speak.
Right.
Is once you lobby yourself by saying, this is what I feel, this is what hurts, you then have to be able to understand how the law works and push the VA or your service provider, your DAVs or whoever you're using to help you within the VA, to push your claim. But it's a key part.
Yeah. And what would you suggest if a lot of service members obviously have back pain, whatever their injuries are, what happens when they get denied, and it's something that the VA should be covering. What steps have you seen or suggestions to be able to push that?
Yeah. First and foremost, whenever you file a claim or get into the VA system, expect to be rejected. So get rid of the thoughts that the VA is going to be fair and good things are going to happen and they're going to honor your contract and welcome you with open arms, and they're going to say, oh, hey, thank you for serving.
Give you a lollipop at the end, right?
Give you a lollipop,
Yeah.
right? It's just not going to happen. Buckle up and prepare for rejection and denial, right? Mm-hmm. I had to take my case at one point all the way to what's called the DC VA Board of Appeals. Very few people know about this, but it's actually an independent reviewer who comes in and listens to both sides, the VA side, and you get to actually testify on your behalf regarding anything you're trying to accomplish: physical disability, mental disability. I kind of lost the point of that question, Ryan. I'm sorry.
As far as once you get denied, your claims get denied.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So again, don't go and expect to be denied, and know that be prepared to file the appeals. So when your service organization that's helping you, or if you're doing it yourself, just go through the appeal process. Standard appeal process has 1 year from the time of denial. And remember, from a financial viewpoint, as long as you keep appealing from the date of your original application, when the VA determines that you are entitled to a disability, the financial benefit has to go all the way back to the date of your original filing, unless you wait more than 1 year in between appeals. Yep. So the bottom line is expect to appeal and then rely on your service organization and the appeal process. In the end, if you have to go to the DCVA Board of Appeals, I found those folks to be very fair, very open-minded, and your ability to truly tell your story to a third party is critical in the final step of an appeal process.
So how do you think your time in the service affected you in the military? It affected you and shaped you into the person that you are now?
Yeah, so I like to say two things taught me never. The first one is in the first book of this series, 2,442 Steps to Crazy. That one taught me not to quit, perseverance. But once I was in the military, and you learn that there's either one of two things happen when you quit. You either die or you get killed. That's it.
Right.
So you got one of those choices. So you can either die, get killed, or fight. So for me, the military taught me never quit. Now you take that lesson into a battle with the VA, don't quit. Don't give up. Take all the military taught you to be tough, to be a warrior, and to keep fighting.
Yeah, because it can actually seem like you're fighting an uphill battle. You're never going to win because the VA is such a large, organization. And
you're literally swimming up a waterfall.
Yeah. And if you can do that, and I could see that would be absolutely amazing to see. But it shows that, you talk about resiliency, right? And never quitting and being a fighter. It's everything that they teach you from the beginning, right? And in the transit and adapting and working the problem and relying on your training and everything else. And we got to apply that to when we get out, but I find that the tough position that we end up in is the transition and the transition stress, because now we're fighting a different battle and we almost feel like nobody's here to fight with us. We don't have somebody to our right and our left. What resources have you used or know of to be able to have that imaginary person to your left and your right? You feel like you have that wall of brotherhood fighting for you. You spoke of your representative and stuff like that. Is there any other resources that veterans can use to be able to help their fight?
Yeah, again, that's a great question. For me, I had brought in service organizations early, back in the 80s and early 90s, and then I decided to go after the VA myself, and I did. I was reasonably successful there, and then the fight just took too much of a toll on me, and I had to let somebody else come in, and I ended up having to sit down with the DAV, which I believe is the largest veterans organization for dealing with veterans and disability in the country. But for me, and again, I want to make sure I say this carefully, all veterans service organizations are great organizations. But for me personally, the DAV really gave me a comfort level with their deep training and their skill set to understand both the mechanics of the VA process, how to properly file all the paperwork, because if you miss a box, you can get tossed right out and go back to the beginning, and then how to sequence it, because there's another piece of the VA battle is sequencing. A recent veteran, we got him in the door over hearing loss, the tinnitus. Once he was in, then he was able to walk in and get a mental health meeting, because he couldn't get one without having a rating, and that's crazy.
Yeah.
It needs to change with the VA.
Right.
But for me, it was the DAV. But there's one big piece that took me about a decade and a half, almost 2 decades to figure out. And that was the VA is not my chain of command. And I'm no longer under an oath that requires me to follow a chain of command.
Right.
My mentality for so long was, okay, I told my story, I fed it to the next person in line, and they're going to send it up the chain of command and all good things are going to happen. Yeah, that's not how it works. You have to learn to buck the chain of command. And for me, at this point in my life, I call the chief of staff at the local VA, Connecticut, or in other states. I don't bother with the people in the middle. When I have an issue or another veteran has an issue, I pick up the phone and call the chief of staff for that state or regional VA facility. And that's how I'm managing to get things done.
Yeah, it's a very important point that you made. We're so used to following the rules, following the chain of command, pushing things up,
sir.
Things come down. Then you get out, and the VA is a big insurance company, essentially. All right.
I like to call it a branch of the RICO system.
So, is there anything you wish civilians understood about military service?
Yeah, we suffer from PTSD, but that doesn't mean we're crazy.
Right.
I mean, some of us are, because I wrote a book called Crazy. but the terms of a veteran, first of all, a veteran is not somebody who served during wartime. Okay, that's a big confusing point. For the longest time, pre 9/11, people look at me and say, "Oh, what war did you serve in?" And I would say, "The big one, the Cold War." and I don't know, they're thinking World War II. I'm like, you can't be that old. So a veteran is anybody who served, the official title is anybody who served more than 90 consecutive days in uniform and on active duty.
Yep.
I mean, there's people who've done 20 years in the reserves who don't qualify as a veteran. Again, that's a whole nother.
Right. Yeah.
But there's so many misunderstood facts about a veteran. The most poignant, probably PTSD, because it has this unknown stigma attached to it, and people don't know how to respond to it. And I have some more thoughts on that, but I don't want to get too long-winded on it.
Yeah, I think just talking about the PTSD aspect, and I think from the beginning, I think a stigma was created because it's something people are unfamiliar with. They don't know how to react to it. They don't know how to.
Can I chip in there?
Yeah, go ahead,
Mr. Windtalker.
Yeah.
So here's something I was trying to relay to a group of veterans recently. One of the guys asked me, actually a guy, 2 girls, and a couple of folks that weren't in the military, but they were spouses. And they said, "What do I do when a civilian comes up to me and grabs what's left of my arm and says, 'Oh, I'm so sorry. What happened to you?'" I said, "Yeah. Now let that sink in for a moment. So here's a vet. He's missing 2/3 of his arm. Lady comes up, I believe it was in Home Depot, and she grabs, just below his shoulder and looks at him and says, 'Oh my,' right? Well, the veteran suffering PTSD lost it. And I mean lost it. Now he can never go back to the Home Depot, and he can't integrate back into society.
Right.
So here's the message. As veterans, we have to learn to transition from a warrior to a wise man. Now, what do I mean by that? Again, you funny folks out there, I'm not talking about the Sopranos,
Right.
Not those
wise guys.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Okay. What I mean by that is we have to learn to understand the civilian community, because honestly, their hearts are in the right place. They just don't know how to react or act. So from a military person, you see somebody missing an arm. Hey, listen, the first time you see it, you do like the rest of us in a car crash. You stare.
All right.
By the time you kind of get, you realize it's just a person missing an arm.
Right.
All right. And you don't walk up to him and say, "Hey, what happened?" You know why? Because he doesn't talk about it.
Right.
Okay, not to you.
Yeah,
right?
and I think a big important thing too is to people need to realize that when you become a service member, the transition boot camp AIT and transitioning into the military, it rewires your brain, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes on that the military does purposefully, um, because that's how the machine needs to operate, especially in a time of war,
Gotta make you a warrior.
right? So you are going to forever be changed when you join the military, and you have to understand that you have to have level of acceptance, right? And when you get out, you're not just going to automatically go back to being Ryan Landry that never served in the military. It goes along the same lines of anything that's happened to your life, um, traumatic or not. It shapes you who you are. But the thing is, the military literally rewires your brain, and how you think. Um, Walk down the street through a store. Um, and I went to Costco a few weeks ago, and I turn and look. Is it time? We're done. Almost like I have a mental clock in my head of how much I can take around being around people, and the anxiety and everything else. And I've learned once that level of anxiety is starting to pick up, I've learned to recognize it before I get to the point of just
Boom.
yeah, just saying you check out, because I'm checked out, and go to the car. We have to start recognizing those triggers before it becomes a bigger issue in that moment. But back to the first point of accepting that when you join the service, however long you're in the service, they're going to rewire your brain of how you think. It's no longer I'm just going to the grocery store, because mission readiness, especially during wartime, is the main mission for the big machine.
Can you tell that story on every one of your podcasts? Because very few people have the courage to say what you said, and that's that you plan out a whole strategy of how you're going to go down to the store to get a gallon of milk
Mhm.
and come back. And I've done it my entire life. And my poor wife, who's suffered right along with me, she understands it now. So the more you tell this to people, Ryan, the more you will, I believe, you will help them tell their story, because
Yeah.
it seems like such a small piece, but it's a huge piece for
Yeah.
the safety and well-being of the veteran to be accepted that they need that type of mental preparedness
Yeah.
just to go get milk.
Right. Yeah. And it didn't dawn on me years ago that was what was going on. It took many years for me to get to the point that I'm at now, and be able to start recognizing those triggers, those moments of anxiety, and realizing that's what's actually happening, and being able to adapt and overcome, and say, hey, I got maybe about 5 more minutes.
You can feel
I
it
can
building.
I can feel it building. And that, it takes such a long time if you don't talk about what you're going through when you come back. Yeah, talk to your buddies you served with, and you talk to other veterans. Um, we get it, right? We get it. Um, but when you talk to people that are closest to you that never served, right? They may not understand completely, um, but they'll be able to understand you as a person, right? What you went through that has changed you and made you who you are. Um, we're not going to sit here and be like, you have to understand the veteran community completely, but the veteran that's in your life, being able to understand them as a person now of who they are now based on the changes they had, um, joining the military, going through the service, deployments, and everything else. I think is a key component into helping veterans transfer out of the military. But we also have to take responsibility as the veteran ourselves to open up so people can understand us a little bit.
Yes. And it goes back to the lady in Home Depot reaching out to the veterans' remaining piece of arm.
Right.
It's up. We're not going to win trying to teach 99% of the population. We're not going to win that battle.
No.
But what we can do is learn to become wise and understand that the public generally cares. They just don't know how to act or react. So if you see somebody, a civilian that sees a veteran missing an arm, they panic.
Yep.
They don't know what to do. They don't know how to act. So they come to you and try to comfort you because they don't know any better.
Mm-hmm.
Try to understand that they're lost and have no understanding of how to respond to you.
Right.
When the reality is, just leave me alone.
Right. Yeah. And, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing bits and pieces. I hope we can have many other sessions as well. Push forward. We can do remote too. But
I kind of like your shop here.
Yeah. Well,
Mr. Wind Talker, this place is pretty cool.
Yeah. It used to be the dining room. The dining room table is now next to the kitchen, and
so once again, a veteran is taking the home and turning it over into something for other veterans.
Right. And my dog's making an appearance now. He wants to be in here. So I wrote down a bunch of questions, and I'm one of those people, my brain is always scattered, right? I'm really good at planning, right? Write it down in the moment, and then I start talking, my brain just goes everywhere. So in your time of service, and I'm going to be jumping on Gulf War podcast next week. I got invited to come on. And I think it's really important for the veteran community, myself being a veteran, to understand the different time frames of service, right? We go through similar stuff. We have similar experiences getting out, what we go through. We have a general connection with each other because of it. What was your basic training like?
Yeah, so I was in when Reagan was rebuilding military. So my basic training was, like I said, it was boring. The most emotional thing that happened to me, well, two things. One, a guy in boot camp slit his wrists. My first experience with attempted suicide by veteran. That was something, and it didn't really resonate with me until I wrote this book. So when I say tell your story, a lot of stuff is going to come out of you and help you heal. But other than that, I got sent to marching party, okay, and I was good. Why am I going to marching party?
No, I was in the Army, so I'm not really sure what marching party is. It like you guys march around? And
yeah. Navy boot camp. Navy boot camp wasn't.
You guys sing songs too.
So, yeah, we marched around a big tarmac and tap danced and went to chow and
garrison life type of stuff.
But at the end of the day, I got sent to marching party because the toilets weren't clean enough in the barracks, and I was furious, and I learned a lesson there that stuck with me for forever. When I sort of voiced my discontent, one of the company commanders said, "Recruit, you're going to marching party. Close the door." And he says, "Hey, listen, I'm making an example of you because if you don't go to marching party, then nobody will follow you. Okay, you need to learn to lead." So that to me was one of the best lessons I got out of boot camp. Other than that, it was relatively boring, and the food was great. I got to tell you that. But look at my background now. So
well, I do have to say, being in the Army, we had Air Force guys sometimes stay on Army posts for like training and stuff. When I found out they got hazard pay for staying on an Army base, I was livid. I'm like,
it was because of your food.
I think to myself, I'm like, I am living in these conditions, which I think are perfectly fine, right? But there's a whole different standard and a different brand, even though like we're all in the military, and I have friends that served in the Air Force, and they, I talk to them about, what their barracks look like. And it's like, the Hilton versus, the Best Western, and they get compensated for it for staying on our base.
Do your research before you join.
Yeah. And that's another thing. Do your research. I have guys that I know that, they took on jobs in the military thinking it was completely something else, and so like for me, I had a guy that came through before we ended up deploying. He just got out of AIT, and he thought fire direction control was a firefighter.
I'm guessing it's not.
No, so it's the guys that do the calculations for artillery, right? So you're directing the fire. He thought he was going to be a firefighter, and then he ended up in a combat arms, and he thought he was going to stay on post back in the rear, and that's why he joined for the college money. So do your research before you decide to pick up a job of what job that the military is you.
Learn what an MOS is.
Yes, MOS. So before we wrap this up, we're coming up on an hour, and we're rolling along.
Might have to be a two-parter.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do it. Well, just like your book, the series that you're coming out. Anything that we do, people have to understand this isn't something transition and growth and everything. It's going to happen in a week when you get out, right? We're not going to be able to just heal everything and magically become, our civilian self before we joined. And understanding, like I talked about, adapting and overcoming different anxieties and stresses as you go along in life is going to be the key component to success. Adapting to the person that you've become to better yourself in the environment in which you place yourself. I think is going to be key, because for me, I got out and I thought, I'm a veteran. I got out and served, I did deployment. And then I go and I talk to friends and family that never served. I have a lot of family members that served, but friends that never even left Connecticut, went to community college or went to one of the local universities, and then you go to try to have a conversation with them immediately after active duty, and you're using all these abbreviations that the wonderfully places in your head
downrange.
Yeah. And you lose kind of sight of the fact that you have a disconnect,
and you start feeling like you can't relate,
right? And people can't relate to you, and you can't relate to them, because the life that you were in, the world changed around you while you served.
That's a great way to say it.
And that brings me to my next point is you have to understand that that's going to happen, and it's okay. You just have to learn to adapt and overcome those situations and start telling your story so they can learn the new you.
Transition from a warrior to a wise man. Yep. What you learned in the military is valuable.
I think you just came up with another title to a book.
It's already in the pipeline. And before we get too far, you forgot to ask me what I did in the Navy.
Well, so you talked a little bit about you're in some type of signal.
See, this is an Army guy trying to figure out a Navy's MOS.
Yeah. There's a serious disconnect when it comes to Army and the Navy. I gotta say that even though my growth was 23 years in the Navy, and I being right near the submarine capital of the world in southeastern Connecticut and having a lot of friends serve in the Navy, the bubblehead stuff goes right over my head.
So I served on the USS Dallas SSN 700. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's 700 horsepower.
If almost. Okay. If you ever saw the movie The Hunt for Red October,
Yep.
USS Dallas.
Yep.
That's the boat.
Really?
I served on that boat for 3 years, 2 months, was deployed for 2 years, 1 month, I think. Okay. While we were deployed, I read Tom Clancy's book, The Hunt for Red October. Shortly before I got discharged, a quartermaster was sent to Hollywood to be a technical advisor for a movie that was coming out called The Hunt for Red October. Now, the reason I tell you that story is a book that I'm deep into right now is a follow-on book about my time on the Dallas, which, if you will, if you like the movie, or like the Tom Clancy book, I've been meeting with a bunch of vets that served on that boat, and we've been telling stories around, and we've got a pretty good outline for a very interesting novel.
Yeah, and I think that movie Sonolus, that's right down the road off of 95. It's a film studio, and a lot of people don't know about it, but it's right off of 95. They filmed some of that movie there in that facility.
I think they did a lot of the technical noise, so to speak. That's an unsophisticated term, but they did a lot of the sound quality, I think, for the movie. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it does have some roots here in southeastern Connecticut. But that's interesting. I didn't know that you served on the boat that was depicted in that movie. That's so back to, what was your job? You skipped around that point.
So I was in interior communications.
Okay.
Right? So phones and all things communication, your microphones, all this stuff you're doing right here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was supposed to be managing all of that, but I never getting to my division. I was doing 1,000 other things on that boat. Kind of like being an artillery guy who never got to shoot any rounds.
Right, yeah. It's one of those things that people don't realize is, especially so in the Army, they go, you're a soldier first, right? There's guys that I served with in Afghanistan, Iraq, two completely separate wars. Guys that I served with in Afghanistan, when they deployed 2nd Cavalry Regiment to Iraq before they reflagged from Washington to Germany, we're doing infantry work, right? And your recruiter doesn't go, hey, just to let you know, you may not be doing the job that you're signing up for. And that happened with guys that I served with. It's to be expected when wars change, and the environment in which they place you in.
Didn't you tell me your MOS was to be a cook in the Army and you ended up shooting artillery?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I thought I was going to flip pancakes. But it's one of those things that, the recruiter, they're there to recruit. Right. And, I knew going in, I had a good recruiter. I knew going in that he was an artillery guy. So he told me right off the bat, hey, you're going to be artillery is what it means. But like I said, I mean, even though being artillery, going to Afghanistan, actually, firing the guns in Afghanistan and doing my main job, there are people that go to Afghanistan and their job is a cook, their job is artillery, their job is communications. Comms guys are the key to the battle, because if you have no communications, you don't know what's going on, and we had a comms guy with us all the time, and help set up the 08254s, and which is, for everybody that doesn't know what that is the mobile antenna to be able to send out.
It's a big wire.
Yep. It's a big antenna that sends out the communications, which in my job I had to be trained on to be able to set up communications, because we had this digital aspect to towed artillery. And if that didn't work out, everything had to go through the radio, which is still communications. So
all of that fun and a bag of MREs to go with it.
Yep. So, all right. Well, I appreciate your time. And if you guys would please go check out D Paul Fleming, author of 2,440 Steps to Crazy. The website is down below, blackhawkbooks.com. You can go and check him out on Facebook at
D Paul Fleming, or you can get the book on Amazon
Yep. And I've looked it up. It immediately comes up when you Google it.
Great read.
Yep. And I'm also going to throw up the logo to look for. We got this wonderful logo for the Blackhawk books. And I want to give a shout out to Sky Hunter Outfitters, who is sponsoring Everlasting Veteran. It is a helicopter hog hunting company, veteran owned and operated out of Oklahoma. Brandy Rector and the team down there. She's a former Marine, door gunner, multiple deployments. Go check them out at Sky Hunter, sky-hunter.com. And you can go to everlastingveteran.com. I'll be putting Doug's stuff up on my website so you can get the links and check out his books and socials and everything else. I appreciate you for coming. This is one of many series, just like your books. And I hope he goes and checks them out.
Thank you so much for having me on, Ryan. Keep the faith and keep moving forward.
Yep. So this is Everlasting Veteran. I am your host, Ryan Landry, a.k.a. Wind Talker.